Friends, Mehdi Azaiez is a professor of Islamic Studies and Theology at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. He is a leading figure in the field of Quranic studies who wrote an extremely influential book on the counter discourse of the Quran. Watch the episode if you want to know what that means. We also collaborated on a major project known as the Qur'an Seminar commentary. This is a very rich discussion in which we speak about ways in which critical readings of the Quran can coexist with theological readings of the Quran. We also speak about Al-Fatiha quite a bit, the first chapter of the Quran, and we ask, is Al-Fatiha engaging with Judaism and Christianity? This is a terrific episode. I'm so grateful you are here for exploring the Quran and the Bible. I will be even more grateful if you take just one moment, please, to subscribe to this channel and like the videos. Thank you so much. Hello, Professor Mehdi Azaiez.
Hi, Gabriel. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Everyone, this is a really great opportunity for me to have a chat with a dear friend and a very famous and distinguished scholar of Quranic studies, Mehdi Azaiez. I will start with just a brief introduction, and then we are going to speak about a couple of things: theology and the critical study of the Quran, the intersection of those two things. We're going to speak also about a few Quranic surahs, so we get a sense of your method of reading the Quran. We'll speak about Al-Fatiha, the first surah of the Quran or chapter, and some others. And then we'll get to know you a little bit better. So is that okay as a plan? Sound okay, Mehdi?
It's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. So everyone, Mehdi Azaiez is a professor of Islamic Studies at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic University of Leuven. That's the French-speaking university, Leuven in Belgium. It's connected historically, of course, to Leuven, but maybe we won't get into all that stuff. Professor Azaiez, his research focuses on Quranic studies in early Islam. He is the author of a wide range of works, articles, and monographs. A really groundbreaking work, which is sort of become a point of reference for Quranic studies, is a book entitled in French, Le Contre-Discours Quranique, or the Quranic Counter Discourse, that was published by De Gruyter in 2015. Maybe we'll have a chance to speak a little bit about it, or we could do it in a second episode, but it's about the way in which the Quran not only discusses, but actually quotes the views and opinions of its opponents in the past, present, and future. So, and now everyone speaks about contre-discours, thanks to Mehdi's book. Really important to note, friends, that Mehdi Azaiez manages an academic website, which is the place to go to get announcements about conferences and books and influential articles in the field of academic Quranic studies. I think the title of the website is Quran in Early Islam, but the URL is simply mehdiazaiez.org, so MEHDI-AZAIEZ.org. Did I do that right?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. And this is a chance to show off something that Mehdi and I worked on together. So hopefully everyone could see this book, the Qur'an Seminar commentary, which is a bilingual book. It has contributions in both French and English. It is the product of a project that Mehdi and I worked together between 2012 and 2013 here at the University of Notre Dame, where he was in residence for that year. And the book brings together the commentaries of 25, a diverse group, international group of 25 scholars of the Quran on 50 Quranic passages. It is available through De Gruyter's website. So if you go to De Gruyter, you'll be able to find the whole thing, open access. Did I do okay with the introduction? Anything you want to add?
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, let's start speaking about Islamic studies and theology. We have an interesting connection, Mehdi and myself, because we're both studying in Catholic departments of theology, but both researching the Quran especially and Islamic studies generally. So question number one is your thoughts about that sort of, intersection of theology in a historically Catholic university and Islamic studies. What would you say? Is it possible to bring those two things together? Can you be theological and still have a truly critical look at a scripture like the Quran?
Thank you for this great question, Gabriel. I think to introduce maybe my answer to this question is maybe to talk a little bit about how I came to a Catholic university. I think that there is a personal elements that can explain my presence in this wonderful institution. I was raised in an environment very specific where Christians, Muslims, and Jewish people, Jewish Christians and Muslim people were in interaction since my teenager age, and I was a teenager. And I was really fascinated by the dialogue we can have together.
And this was in Paris, right?
Yeah, it was in Paris. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a wonderful place where you can, I mean, have those conversations.
Yeah.
And meeting very faithful people to their own faith, Christians and Jewish people, give me the sense of the importance of a deep knowledge of your own tradition. But I deepen my own tradition based on these constant interactions with others, with other faiths. And I think to be in a Catholic institution, it's for me totally normal. Something that is coming from a very personal experience, and that it's really common for me. Not really strange, but it's a logical path coming from a long history, a personal history, in combination with many people. And I was really marked profoundly by my trip with Catholic friends in, for example, in Israel for a pilgrim. And it was, in the same time, a deep experience, religious experience, but also, I would say, also a better understanding of what is my difference in a very respectful way.
So
And,
I can imagine, sorry to jump in, but I can imagine someone saying, listen, even theologically, the relationship between the Bible and Christianity is different than the relationship between the Quran and Islam, right? So, I mean, just briefly, the Bible, even theologically speaking, not historically, just theologically, the Bible comes well after the mission of Jesus, at least the New Testament, obviously, and it forms around the community. It's formed by the community. Christ establishes a community, and then the Bible emerges out of the community, whereas the Quran is the beginning of Islam. I mean, it begins with Surah Al-Alaq and the experience of inspiration that the Prophet had on Mount Hira. And so the Quran forms a community, whereas for Christianity, the community forms the Bible. And so someone might say, isn't there a danger of using Christian ways of reading scripture and artificially and inappropriately applying them to reading the Quran?
Yes, but I think, Gabriel, that the fact that we are aware of those differences that give us the possibility to deepen our own understanding of our tradition. What I mean by that is that, of course, the Quran is the center of the Islamic faith. I would say very briefly, but we have to be careful of those comparisons. But that the place of the Christ in Christian faith, it's the place of the Quran for Muslims. We have to be careful, of course, of the comparisons, but I think there is something true in these comparisons. Slightly, very fastly said.
Yes.
Yes, you're right. Our relationship with the text is very, I would say, very singular in a way. It's not the same interaction that you can have with the gospel. It's not the center, I would say, but it's the figure of the Christ. For Muslims, the interactions as listeners or as readers is really fundamental, of course. Of course, we had to add also the tradition, I mean, the discourse of the Prophet, hadith, and collection of sayings of the Prophet. But if we're focusing on the main, I would say, theological aspect or pillar of Islam, is this relation with the text of the Quran. Definitely.
Yes.
And what I would like to say also, to better understand our singularity is to better understand also what is the difference between us. And it means also to invest your own theology, to be more aware of what is the Christian faith or the Jewish faith. Yes. So I see this dynamic of deepen your own tradition by looking at the others also.
Yes.
This is very important. I mean, this is the dynamic, both that must be present in the same time.
Without conflation, maybe, but yeah. Can I ask then, I mean, without, maybe you don't want to go into detail about this, because these things can be interesting, but just your experience as a Muslim, maybe historically, I don't remember if we actually spoken about this, but are you the first Muslim professor in the Department of Theology at Leuven ever?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that's extraordinary.
But the same case in Leuven, when it was, I won't
previously when you were at Leuven.
When I was in Leuven.
Yes. So, and I mean, the foundation of Leuven, which, you know, Leuven emerges from when there's the division, but when was that? How old is the university?
1420.
Okay.
25.
Okay. And we brag at Notre Dame because we're really old, because 1842. 1842. Yeah. I mean, so that's just extraordinary. Maybe I should have put that in introductory notes. But so, I mean, what has that experience been like? Maybe generally, I don't know if you have an anecdote or two. Was there, I don't know, is it difficult being the first and the Muslim professor in a Catholic Department of Theology? Certain expectations, maybe from colleagues or from the university or from students, any sort of, I don't know, anecdotes or thoughts you could share about that?
Yeah, I never thought that I am the first Muslim, you know, in this, in the Faculty of Theology. To be honest, I never thought about it. Well, I would say I feel at home in the sense that I always worked on, you know, theological, I mean, my first experience in a Catholic institution start in 2000 when I was doing my own master thesis research, and I spent 3 months working on different projects to gather Muslims and Christians around some topics about pilgrimage, about questions about the unicity of God. So it was an experience. My first experience came from a long experience back to 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Sorry, just I missed some light here, and I see my presence here as a continuation of this experience. What is really striking for me is that I've discovered that we have the same questions front of the text that front of our own research about the Bible or the Quran. We raise the same questions about manuscripts, about interaction with the text, about how to use new methodologies to analyze the text. So we have, I would say, same issues, but we try to apply sometimes even same methodologies to say something about the text. And what was also very striking for me is that we have a long conversation with my colleague from theology. One of them is Benoit Bourgine, who worked and published recently a book called La Théologie biblique, French biblical theology, which intend to see how integrates progress of critical approach of the text, historical approach of the text, and theology. So you see here how this questions is my question also. Yes. We're going to talk about it, of course, after, but the main issue and the main problem, not the problem, but the main questions for me today is how we can integrate articulate the progress of Quranic studies, the golden age of Quranic studies, as you said, and to integrate those progress in our own reflection, theological reflection.
So the critical academic work, how can that nourish theological work?
Definitely.
Yes. So, I mean, you don't have to speak about maybe particular experiences within the faculty there, but just generally, as you engage in this enterprise of bringing together theology and historical critical study, has there been resistance from either side? So are there people who think that, oh, this is the work of a believer who doesn't actually do sort of cutting edge work? It's just sort of soft, maybe kind of apologetical work that tries to spare the feelings of Muslim believers to not offend anyone. Do you get that? Or on the other hand, do you get people who say, oh, this guy says he's a Muslim, but he's actually absorbed Orientalism, revisionism, hypercritical things, and he's sort of undermining Islam by being hyper. Do you see what I mean? Do you get either side of those possible sort of currents of criticism?
Yes, both aspects. I've been confronted by both aspects. From students, I remember some of them were really traditional in their approach. I respect this, but integrate Orientalist approach, historical approach were really difficult for them, was really difficult for them. They can stay in silence during your course, or they can come to you at the end of the course respectfully, but saying, you know, I remember once one of my students coming from Turkey, she was really surprised by my teaching, and she said she was really shocked. Sometimes when you use notions like redactors of the text of the Quran, interpolations, things that you explain in your course, but that obviously create I would say a dissonance, if you compare it to the traditional narrative. Yes, it creates some questions, sometimes some, I would say, some nervous reactions from students. And what is really important in my teaching is always to define exactly where we are. What is the methodology? What is the presuppositions of my work? And to clarify clearly what is the field. To be sure that everything is clear to everyone, and to not mix different aspects which create confusion. So when you have an historical approach, I try to explain them exactly what it means. And of course, I try to raise questions. How this historical approach can question your own tradition, our own tradition, in which way? So it's not an attitude to say this is the truth, but it's more about raising questions, and this is really fundamental. Of course, on the other side, we have some colleagues who said to me that I'm too Orientalist in my approach, and not enough theological. And sometimes they reproach me to not read enough Ghazali or classical Mufassirun or classical other commentators, exegetes. So yes. It's unfair, really unfair. But obviously, sometimes they reproach me to not be enough in the tradition, of course. Yes. Yes. But it's rare, to be honest, and it's always a dialogue. It's never a fight or a polemic. It's more about dialogue with a big respect. To be honest, there is no really problem. I never faced many problems. I think that some of my colleagues who are really critical, who have a very strong critical approach, yes, yes, can say to me that I miss sometimes a critical approach. But it's really rare.
Don't go far enough with
far enough.
Critical.
And
Yeah.
and because I take seriously the Muslim tradition.
Yes. Yes.
It's really important also.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can have the blessing of criticism from both sides.
I think so. But it's maybe a good sign.
What's interesting, I don't know how much you experience this at Leuven, but certainly at Notre Dame, there are colleagues of mine who work in biblical studies. I mean, I would think first of all of God rest his soul, our colleague now deceased, John Meyer, who worked on the historical Jesus, who's, his classic series of books, his magnum opus about Jesus was entitled A Marginal Jew.
Yeah.
And that gives you a flavor of the critical nature of the work. But some people don't even know this. He was a priest who lovingly and with great devotion celebrated Mass and was a great believer. And so he sort of modeled for me how you can do.
He is a model for me too.
You can do serious critical work and also remain a believer and do theological work as well.
No, he's a model.
Why don't we go ahead and get into the text of the Quran so our viewers and listeners can get a better sense of your approach to the text. So I thought that we'd start with Al-Fatiha. Is that okay? I mean, this is a part of Muslim prayer recited many times a day in ritual prayer. Of course, very distinctive surah. This is the first surah or chapter of the Quran. I have maybe some specific questions, but I mean, could we just start with why is Al-Fatiha important to Muslims?
Yes, I think that first of all, I would like to say that as a Muslim, what is really striking with this text is first of all, it's a beautiful text. It's a beautiful text, short, of course, that we repeat 17 times by day when you pray. So it's again, be careful with the comparison, but it's like an Islamic pattern. But again,
like the Islamic Our Father or Lord's Prayer. Yes.
We have to be prudent of course, but what is interesting, guys, one idea in the Muslim tradition, of course, as you know, there is a lot of Muslim exegesis with hundreds of pages for each word of this passage. But it's striking for me is that the text of the Quran, I mean, the tradition always said to one, I'm talking, for example, of the saying of Ali about this passage, which is really striking, saying that the entire Fatiha, I mean, the Quran, I mean, the Fatiha contained the entire text, al-Kitab, so the entire text. And the Bismillah contained the Fatiha. And the letter B contained the Bismillah. So this approach, really poetical approach, implied to me that here there is a very strong teaching behind this. The Fatiha contained all the matters of the text, all the topics of the text, obviously. The creation, the glorification of God, the eschatology. Many of these aspects is really striking for me. One of the other, I mean, we can read the text in a different way. Of course, in an historical way. We can read it through the lens of the tafsir, the exegesis. That's what we've done very briefly here. But we could can look at it also with an historical point of view. We can think about, for example, that the tradition had two surahs that are really similar to it, that was not included in the Mus'haf itself. And what is striking is to see that the Fatiha was chosen to be the introduction of the Mus'haf and not the two other texts. Which means that the Fatiha belongs to a process of selection, of compilation of the text. So it's not only about beautifulness of the text or belonging to the tradition. It's also a trace of how the community, the first community, chosen parts of the parts of text to be integrated in the final Mus'haf, final text of the Quran.
Yes. So is it okay if I make a couple of observations just about sort of the literary nature of Al-Fatiha? So many of our viewers will know that the Quran has 114 chapters or surahs. that for the most part, these go from longer surahs to shorter surahs. Fatiha is, of course, a notable exception. It is the first surah and Professor Azaiez used the word mushaf, so the codex, the standard arrangement of the Quranic revelation. And it's a very short surah. It's only 7 verses. So this is something that stands out. And something else that stands out is that, I mean, at least verses 5, 6, and 7 are prayers directed to God in the voice of the one who is praying. So, and these are exceptional. There are very few scattered verses elsewhere in the text that may or may not be similar. But anyway, nevertheless, this is exceptional because generally the Quran is either in the divine voice, articulated in the divine voice, or articulated in a sort of divine third person, where, at least according to the standard way of reading the text, God is speaking about himself. So I just want to get some of those things out. I don't know, did you want to comment on anything I just said, or should I go on to some questions?
No, this is the process of enunciation of the text of the Quran that is really striking. We see here that it's a praying. So you are, I mean, like Muhammad Hakoun made a very great study of this chapter in his Lecture du Coran. There is one chapter who is intending to use new methodologies, linguistical methodologies, to analyze this text. And what was really striking, one of the many statements he made, what was really striking for me is the fact that it's performative text. When you recite it, you celebrate God automatically. This is so one of these one of the main aspect of this text that is really very interesting for me is that it's a very performative text. So it is made to pray, really. There is another aspect also, Gabriel, that I would like to underline. There is many others, but one of them is this sentence, Melek Yawmiddin. So how can you translate this? The Lord of the last day, you can say that. But when you connect it and you try to read it also in a very Jewish way, you would say Melech Yom Adin, which is very interesting. Melech Yom Adin is an expression that you can find in Yom Kippur, and that you celebrate, of course. And what is also very striking, so not something else, this is the only day on Yom Kippur where you have a prostration like Muslims prosternate in there. It's not the Hamidah, you know, when you pray and you're debout. Sorry, Gabo, just some so Gabriel.
Standing.
Yeah, the Hamidah is just, and here this is the only moment in history, I mean, in the year where the Jewish are invited to prosternate like the Muslims, which is very interesting. So Melech Yom Adin is there is a connection between this pray and maybe also the Jewish
so the
Jewish tradition. Same thing with, we're going to talk about it after maybe, but with Al-Ikhlas, with the other example.
Yes,
like
we'll get to Ikhlas. Yeah, Surah 112. Well, the Fatiha starts with, as you mentioned, the Basmala or Bismillah. And just to note, this is another extraordinary feature of this surah, just in literary terms, that it is part of the surah itself. So it's verse 1, the Basmala or the Bismillah. Whereas for all the other surahs, except Surah 9, which we don't have to speak about right now, it is, at least in the way that you find a standard mushaf, it is not part of the surah itself. And there's a long debate over whether it's, in those cases, it should be considered as revelation or not. But that's just interesting to note. So the surah starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, usually translated as in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. The long debates over how to deal with Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. But you said that this Bismillah encapsulates the whole surah, which in turn encapsulates the whole Quran. So could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, why does it matter that the Quran begins with a reference, maybe a double reference to divine mercy? Ar-Rahman meaning something like the compassionate, and Ar-Rahim meaning the merciful.
Well, I always consider that Ar-Rahman here is the name of God. We can translate it as by the name of God, Ar-Rahman, his name, Ar-Rahim, the compassionate.
Who is the compassionate?
Yes, who is the compassionate? It's really difficult to translate it.
Yeah, can I say something about that?
Because
Because that might be complicated for some people, but it's actually super interesting.
Yes.
So everyone will know that the standard name for God in the Quran is Allah. Sometimes in English, probably in French too, I imagine. People will use Allah, especially Muslims, instead of using God. Or in French, Dieu, they'll just say Allah. But the Quran has at least one more, but has a second frequently used name for God, sometimes located in one particular period chronologically, which is Ar-Rahman. And Ar-Rahman, historically speaking, in pre-Islamic times, is used by Christians and Jews for God in South Arabia.
Definitely.
And we even have a verse of the Quran which says you can call on him as Allah or call on him as Ar-Rahman, the merciful. So what Mehdi is pointing at there is when the Quran begins with these words in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman, who is the merciful, it could be two ways of calling on God's name, Allah and Ar-Rahman, or some people would say no, it's God is Allah and Ar-Rahman is basically a kind of adjectival noun which is describing Allah as the one who is merciful. Anyway, maybe I didn't need to go through all that, but I thought I'd clarify.
No, thank you so much for clarification, Gabriel. So about this passage, which is, well, of course, what is interesting is that this expression, you can find it in all the text, the entire text of the Quran, except for the chapter 9, which didn't start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The interest for me is here to see that there is three terms. I always ask myself why we have Allah, Rahman, Rahim. Why this three different ways to decline the identity of God? This is a question. I'm not saying that I have the answer, but this is very interesting to see here that there is three different ways to name God or to define him. First, you can say that define. The other thing to say is that, yes, this is, I don't know exactly why here we have what was your question, Gabriel?
Well, about specifically the invocation of mercy and compassion, or at least mercy with Ar-Rahim. Again, it comes up in the in the third verse, where it's repeated, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, in the third verse of Al-Fatiha. So clearly, Al-Fatiha itself wants to mention mercy and compassion as a divine quality at its very opening. And at least the compilers of the Quran who chose to put Fatiha first wanted to make this sort of the first thing you hear when you read or hear the Quran. Do you know what I mean? Like why this interest in foregrounding mercy and compassion?
I think because this is one of the aspects of how the text of the Quran deal with the nature of God. This is one of the main nature of God, his compassion, but also his justice. Of course, as always, there is
because he's also the Lord, as you said, the Lord of the Day of Judgment or the Last Day.
So, and it is really important to raise this question, is that the text of the Quran is often ambivalent. We have here a strong aspect of his identity, if we can say that, Ar-Rahman, but also this Rahman is always, in some ways, contrebalancé, balance with the idea of his own justice. theologically, it's really interesting that the text of the Quran repeatedly acknowledge the mercifulness of God. One of our young theologian based in Germany, Kurschit, underlined the fact that this is a key of an hermeneutical key to understand the text of the Quran.
The central principle.
Yeah, this is a central word that can explain the entire text of the Quran. So this is by rahmah, by practicing rahmah, that invite God through his text, that we can read it more deeply.
I mean, sorry, just to complicate things and maybe push back a little to what Professor Khurshid argues. Also, Mustansir Mir says that very explicitly in an article he wrote in Islamo Christiana, that all of the Quran is mercy. I mean, you've already pointed out that it's more complicated because there's a heavy accent on divine justice, and I would even say, I mean, I sort of wrote a book about it. I mean, in some ways, my book, Allah, God in the Quran, was a response to those who would say, on the one hand, God is all mercy, and on the other hand, those who would say, oh, the Quran has a vengeful God who has no pity. He's a sort of dictator time. So I wanted to bring those together. But I mean, but just to show that if it matters the way Al-Fatiha begins with its emphasis on mercy, doesn't it matter also how it ends? Because in the prayer, and I'll just read the last two verses. I mean, in the prayer with which it concludes, it says, "Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, sirat alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayr maghdubi alayhim, wala ad-dallin," which in English is, now I'm reading from Kuli Qara'i's translation, "Guide us on the straight path, the path of those whom you have blessed, such as have not incurred your wrath, nor are astray." So, I mean, it begins with Ar-Rahman Rahim, but then it ends with a mention of divine wrath. Maghdub is the passive participle from ghadab, meaning anger, right? So, I mean, isn't this part of the story too?
I totally agree. As I said, the text of the Quran is ambivalent. What is really important to understand, I think, for me, and because I'm a reader of the text of the Quran, this ambivalence is really important. Why? There is a tension inside the text. The tension is giving you the possibility to question the text. It's not white, black. It's always, I would say, in an intermediate situation where the reader, the listener, is engaged in his reading to see that nothing is obvious. Because it's not obvious, it raised questions. I mean, the text of the Quran, you can find many, I would say, contradictions, obvious contradictions. And the work of the theologian is to question this ambivalence, those questions, those tensions. And it gives you the possibility to be in continuous relation with the text. I would say, alhamdulillah, there is some tension because you're still in dialogue with it, in conversation, and sometimes in fight in some ways. I will say in a different way, but you are working with the text. Sometimes the text is
very interesting. Sorry to jump in again. I must be the most annoying interviewer ever. But I mean, this is something that I would think, although maybe in the comment section someone can correct me, that the notion of struggling with God, struggling with the text is common in Judaism, I think, especially in the rabbinic tradition. And I think in Christian spirituality, at least, I think this is sort of a common notion. Sometimes people refer to the book of Job. You know, Job is struggling with God and divine justice. But I mean, Islam, doesn't it? I mean, it has this notion of yaqeen, of certainty, and that this should be the disposition, along with taqwa, piety or God fear of God. That this should be a disposition. There shouldn't really be a struggle with the text. I mean, we're getting really theological now, but so maybe you want to steer us back to a more academic approach. But what are your thoughts about that? I mean, can it be okay for a Muslim to still
But-
have some sort of struggle, indecision, questions?
Because when you read the text of the Quran, you are facing like a relation, a special relation, a very close relation, intimate relation between the first addressee, Muhammad in the tradition, and God. This relation is not a line there. I mean, it's a dialogue, it's a conversation. Of course, God's speaking to him, but he is reacting, God reacting to his reaction. So it's always a deep relation. And this relation is not always the same. There is some evolution. We can see that the prophet is in doubt sometimes, that he's fighting, not fighting, but he is in interactions with it in a very strong way.
When the Quran tells him to be patient, for example.
To be patient,
trust,
constantly. The sabr is always a call from God. I mean, it's very theological, sorry about that, but I'm trying to answer to your question. So we, in some ways, is receiving a strong power, a strong saying. And we are invited by this, his own experience, we are invited by, because we are readers, to someday reproduce, we are invited to reproduce this relation. I mean, we live in this relation.
That's very, very, very interesting. I know this is related to your current project, which I think we didn't mention at the beginning. I should have. We'll put it hopefully in the comment, in the description. But this is something you're working through now. I mean, the importance of the first addressee, or Muhammad, in the text. But what's fascinating for me now is to hear how you're making a connection between the reader's experience and learning from the prophet's experience.
Yeah, this is, I mean, there is an overlapping experience. The first addressee, he has experienced the gift of the Quran, and in different stages, and we are witnessing, by reading this text, we are witnessing this experience. And the text, obviously, what is really striking also is this is a universal experience. It's inviting you to enter in it and to live it also, but by your own life, your own universe, your own experience.
Yes, it's not my job really to make counsel for those going through doubts or questioning, but there are cases in the Quran where both Abraham and then in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the disciples, they ask for their hearts to be made firm. And so that seems to model as well, at least, this disposition of, no, it's okay to have some doubt, and you sort of turn to God in this experience and things like that. Okay, so one last thing on Al-Fatiha, and then we'll get on to Al-Ikhlas. We spent a lot of time on Al-Fatiha, but it's very important, so I don't regret it. The last two verses, the very last verse alludes to both those upon whom there is anger and those who are astray. There are plenty of traditions in the commentaries that identify those upon whom there is anger with the Jews, and those who are astray with the Christians. This is actually represented in a very popular, at least in religious circles, English translation of the Quran, that of Muhsin Khan, which I think, I might get this wrong, someone can correct me in the comments, was the sort of standard translation by the Fahd printing press in Medina, and disseminated widely through Saudi funding. So what do you think about this? Is there any reason to see Al-Fatiha alluding directly to Jews and Christians here?
Well, if we read, of course, the Muslim exegesis, we are, I mean, most of them, 90% of them, it's identify clearly a group. Which group? If you say Jewish and Christians, we were talking about what? What is the reality of this group? We're talking about groups at the time of the Prophet, or universalizing it? This is first the question that is really, really important. But can we respect the text in some ways? He didn't say anything about the identity of it. Just we can maybe stay with it. We can generalize those adjectives, those descriptions, short descriptions, and don't give any identity of the text. What is maybe striking also for me in the text of the Quran? If we read the text of the Quran, we see that there is a decontextualization. We don't have many groups, named group, of course, Jewish, Christians, we have Nazara, etc. But it's always vague. And this is, I would say, the strongness of the text. Maybe I won't say it this way, but what is interesting is that the text give you not really key to contextualize it in a very detailed way. The question is why? I didn't say that I would have an answer.
So the author could have
but he didn't.
Jews and Christians, but he didn't. Yes,
he didn't. So what it means, how the reader can interact with this. We can, I mean, there is maybe a weakness here because you can invent the text in any time because there is no specific group here.
Yes.
So you can invest it anytime. And I think here we can invest those words by saying this is a universal type that we cannot define exactly. Ceux qui encourent la colère, ceux qui s'égarent. Yes, but who? I think that we have maybe to respect the text and to say that we don't know. We don't know. We can obviously look at some other part of the text, which invite maybe to see that there is maybe a group called Jewish and Christians, but it's weak. It's a weak argument.
Well, this brings us right to Surah Al-Ikhlas, because we have a similar situation, very short surah, one of the shortest in the Quran, Surah 112. And if it's okay, let's turn to that. Also used frequently in prayer, and very important for Muslims. I mean, I see it referred to frequently in sort of religious conversation on social media and otherwise. Sometimes specifically as a response to Christianity, and I'll read it in the English translation in just a second. But also with sort of the vibe of this is the heart of the Quranic message, is Surah Al-Ikhlas. Yeah. So again, Surah 112 in Arabic, it's Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. And in English, it's say, He is God, the one, God the Samad. And maybe you can clarify for us, but there's lots of meaning. Kuli Karai translates the all-embracing. But and then 3 and 4 are very important. He neither begat nor was begotten, nor has he any equal. So what is the importance of this surah to Muslims, and what's interesting from an academic perspective about it?
Of course, for Muslims is defining the Tawheed, the unicity of God, which is a main topic in Islamic theology. Let me say a personal note, give a personal note. When I was a teenager, I was praying reciting this text. I was not aware of what I know now about the nature of this text and the possible sources of this text. Just want to underline that we are, the relation, of course, the interaction that we have with the text is different with the evolution of our own life. In the beginning, I would say I would have a naive, which is not a bad, I mean, it's not negative in my mind to say a naive interaction with it. And now that I have those historical approach, gives me very deepen my own understanding of it. Just one example. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. First verse. The term ahad, which is very striking. And why? Because, I mean, we can wait if you have knowledge about Arabic, you can wait for a term like wahid and instead of ahad. And the term ahad is very striking, and Muslim exegetes asking why this.
Instead
Of course, here we know that the Shema Israel is very clear and gives us a key. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So listen, Israel, the name of God, your Lord is one. It is your Lord.
In the Hebrew is
God, your Lord is one. Ahad. So the connection between the Jewish Shema Israel, which is at the heart of the Jewish tradition, is present in the text that we repeat 70 times by day. We pray this text. So the connection between the Shema Israel and also third, Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, is not begotten. How do you translate it in English, Gabo?
Well, I'm just reading.
Yeah. So we did it.
He neither begat nor was begotten.
So this surah is like a negotiation between two fundamental texts from the Jewish tradition, the Shema Israel, and the Nicaea, so the Concile of Nicaea.
The Nicene Creed.
Nicaea, yeah. And so for me now, I mean, reciting it, I understand that the Muslim, in their act of praying, mobilize, even if they don't know, but they mobilize two fundamental texts from the Jewish and the Christian.
Just to clarify, the Nicene Creed declares of the Son of God, that he is begotten, not made. So you can see the connection. Yes.
So there is here, I mean, presence in the short verse and short surah, two main texts from the previous literature, from the previous religion, Jewish and Christian religion, fundamental text, which is really striking for me. And in a very short text, this is really, and that's why it's really important. This text is really important for me. Also, the term samad is, I won't translate it because I don't know what it means.
Neither do I.
To be honest,
there's an article, you probably know it, by Franz Rosenthal, where he
but
he goes through the commentaries, and I don't know, he looks at something like dozens of possible translations, and comes up with one based on, I think, like ancient Northwest linguistics or something, and I forget.
It's really difficult. It's really difficult, and but we can ask also the question is it so violent? Is a text which is a refutation of the divinity of, the filiation that God has?
That's a good point.
Is it a criticism, a violent criticism against Christians? Is it also a criticism of Judaism? I think that here there is a dynamic of negotiation. I like this idea because it comes from Angelika Leuven. The idea that we take from other tradition, but we have our own agenda, theological agenda here, and we find a middle way in some ways. I see it as a middle way, this text. Maybe we have to elaborate on it.
No, but I see your point, because especially at the beginnings of a new religious movement, there has to be differentiation. And I like the way you ask the question, do we have to see this as violent, even if we mean by violence polemic, right?
Sorry.
I mean, I think there's a way to not be polemical, but still differentiate. And I'm not seeking to defend the text or attack the text, but I mean, the history in late antiquity of Jews and Christians, and very often the Christians were the polemical ones, but part of Christian polemics, presumably, although I'm not a scholar of the origins of Christianity, had to do with defining its own movement. Why are we different from Jews? And so, I mean, some of that has to take place. And after all, you can, I mean, thinking today, you can disagree and disagree well, right? We don't have to reduce the Quranic and Christian or Quranic and Jewish message to something in the middle, some common denominator or something.
Yeah. I mean, what is the difference between the Shema Israel here and the text of the Quran? In the text of the Quran, the Qul, this is an injunction. So you create a process of an enunciation where God's speaking to someone, the first prophecy, which is, and the other thing is that Israel is not present. It means that the text of the Quran tried to universalize the message. It means also that it can comprise also Israel. It means even if Israel is not here, it's universalize the message, not only to the community of Israel, but to all of men. And on the other side, which is here, the third verse here obviously is an attempt to remind us that God is one. God is one. But I was thinking, is this message totally different from the Christian message? Because God is one also.
That is so the first words. The first words of the Nicene Creed is we believe in one God. Or actually, I believe it's credo.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see that is it so polemical in some ways, or I mean, what is the message behind this? What is clearly? Is it clearly a message against the Christian dogma? It's not obvious for me. It's not obvious.
Well, I think we should return to this. This is very close to a project that I'm working on now, which is whether there's a Christian context to the Quran's self-articulation. So you would be a really great conversation partner for that question. Okay. So let's return to it, if that's okay. And I wanted to get onto a few questions. There's some others that I'm going to save also for a second episode. We were going to speak more about counter discourse, your first book project, and although I'll give you a chance at the end to speak about your new book project, I'm going to skip the question about, we've touched on it a bit, but I'm going to skip the additional question about the first addressee in the text. I wanted to just get onto some questions about your own journey in Quranic studies as a way to conclude our conversation. So could we think about that together, or share with our viewers, who are some of the thinkers who influenced you? It doesn't have to be strictly Quran study scholars, but just generally in your intellectual development, who are some of the key figures, who have shaped the way you are now?
Okay, very briefly, I would like to say that I'm a French. I was born in Paris, so yeah, I know, but I was really fundamentally trained in the French school. So we have the great chance to have been in interaction with many writers, French writers, from the medieval time to nowadays. We have a long tradition of great writers. There is many of them who inspired me. Many of them from the medieval time to nowadays. Of course, the playwriters, we say, dramaturge, Racine, Corneille, all those names that are very famous. Of course, Pascal. So Catholic thinkers first also were really important for me. I'm thinking about Descartes and Pascal were really fundamental for me in my training. But also, as I said to you, literature, very important literature. It's not about Quranic studies at all, but it's really important in my life still today. But also, I would like to add some Jewish thinkers. Emmanuel Levinas, who had a very big impact in me, but also Hermann Cohen. Why? Because Hermann Cohen also, because he raised the question in the beginning of the 19th century about how to be a Jewish and a German in the same time, how to embrace Kant and embrace the contribution of the Talmud and all the tradition, the Jewish tradition. Here we have some answers which are a richness richness for us nowadays to think about our own condition as Muslims, but also in European environment. And this is very inspiring for me, and they are really inspiring for me. Of course, who inspired me, you, of course, in Quranic studies, but many of our colleagues really, sincerely, many scholars, French, from also Arabic country. I'm thinking about Hisham Jaid, for example, who was a very important scholar for me. Mohammed Arkoun, of course, also.
I want to speak about, can we speak about Arkoun for a second, because you held up his book for us, Lecture du Coran.
Lecture du Coran.
Yeah, so I want to speak about Arkoun for a second, and let me forget to ask you about your doctoral advisor as well. But let's start with Arkoun. This is a way maybe to combine another question too, because I wanted to ask you about hermeneutics. You've already mentioned that word in our discussion, hermeneutics, and why this word matters for Quranic studies. So I'm guessing that Arkoun was a conversation partner for you in thinking about the Quran and hermeneutics. But generally, what was the importance of Arkoun for you in thinking about the Quran?
But I think because hermeneutics is a theory and methodology about interpretation. And Arkoun gave us the possibility to think that we can embrace the Muslim tradition, the construction of Islam, as he said, as a human construction based through the lens of new methodologies coming from linguistics, from human sciences. I mean, Arkoun is important because he always said, you know, we need human science to understand the human construction of Islam as a product of history. And we need to use those tools to be in distance and to fight against literally interpretations that are dangerous for us. That is really dangerous for us. And this is why Arkoun gives us, I would say, the path. Give us a direction, a good direction to deepen our understanding of Islam as a construction, of a human construction, and to give us tools, or maybe to point to different tools where you have to be engaged, in which you can find the way to interpret in a new way.
Which
and
is
a deeper understanding of theology, and give us
the role of the reader or the interpreter as an active part in the construction of theological ideas.
Yes, of course. But you know, Gabriel, we can summarize 3 different orientations to read the text of the Quran. First, we can contextualize the text, focusing on the author, trying to understand the origin of the text, make some relation between late antique text, text from Arabia, the poetry. So in a consistent comparison. So the first orientation is more about contextualization, what you're doing. The second second orientation is to look at the text as it is. So to understand the singularity, the composition of the text, and to use different tools to understand the rhetoric, etc., the composition, like I did for the counter discourse, etc. And the third one is to focusing it's not about context, it's not about text, but it's about the reader and the interaction of the reader with the text. And understand this interaction is help us to avoid maybe to give an historical point of view of different interpretation. To not say that this is an interpretation, but this interpretation comes from a specific time and with specific cultural understanding and mentality, etc. So these 3 orientation, I tried to put them in a dialogue. This is my own work. My work is to intend to
makes everything more complicated, but much more interesting, exciting. I mean, the venture of studying.
It's complex, but I think this is the way I consider my work, is to put in dialogue these three different ways to interpret the text or to orient your reading of the text.
Yes, yes. It's the more complicated way, but maybe the more exciting and rewarding way. Did you ever meet Arkoun?
Yes, once, but very briefly.
Okay.
And yeah, it was very briefly, and it was in the institution called in Paris, Lima, Institut du Monde Arabe. I met him very, very, yeah.
But Hisham Jait, you met on several occasions, I think.
Yeah, several occasions, and I even I made some interview with him as a very, very interesting person also. And very interesting because they are, I would say, they were trained in the French cultural institutions, and they have also a Muslim Arabic background, which is very mixed. And I really feel that I am in their path in some ways. Yeah, really mentor. Of course, there is also Claude Gillot.
No, we can't miss.
Oh no,
because your doctoral advisor was
my master.
Who did not come from Arab Muslim background, as
no, not at all.
People might guess, at least the Arab part from the name Claude Gillot. So a word or two about him and his influence on you?
No, I think this is one of the person who gave me the pleasure to give more detailed, I mean, to be more precise in my work. So I love footnotes like him, but I mean, he's the master. I'm just
his footnotes just consume the whole page.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. There is only no, not only, no. But more seriously, I think he's a model to deepen our understanding or knowledge about tafsir, about this Muslim tradition of exegesis. He's one of the most important contributor and specialist of this field, and I was really blessed to be in touch with him, because he had a very impressive library also, and in his way to read the text in details, it's really fascinating.
You were also blessed to have one of the funniest doctoral advisors out there.
Yes, he had a sense of humor, special sense of humor. I really love him.
Well, maybe as a final note, and I really hope I can have you back because there's a lot more to speak about, but could you briefly introduce us to your current project?
Yes, my current project is working on the first addressee, this presence, this very striking presence of, I would say very briefly, Muhammad in the text of the Quran. Last contribution of Denis Gril about Muhammad in the Quran is really impressive. And I'm really inspired by his long article, but my main focus is to understand what is the nature of this relation, this very specific relation between the divine voice and the prophet. And I try to trace the stage of this relation, to see what is in the intimate, in the close relation with him, between the voice of God and the prophet. What is this relation? How we can define it? What is behind this? What is the issue? What is, I would say, the drama behind this? And I think this is a very interesting way to read the text of the Quran, and to read, I would say, an experience, an intimate experience. This is my project, and I'm really fascinated by this this project, because I think I have here an example of a religious experience with all those aspects that is quite similar to what we can read about Ezekiel or Isaiah. But here, what is really different is that God speaks. This is really fascinating. And I was really very inspired by the work of Jean-Luc Marion and his last book on Revelation. So I tried to combine his approach of revelation in a phenomenological way, and also to read through his way, through his phenomenological tools,
Yes.
how the text of the Quran emerge, how this relation emerge from us, without looking at first to the tafsir. I will look at it after, but first let's see what happened when you will read only the text.
Yes. Well, everyone, I think you just got a preview of our next episode, if I can convince him. A discussion with Professor Azaiez, because there's a lot to speak about there in order to understand the text, in order to understand the reader's relationship with the text, in order also to think about potential dialogue with thinkers such as Jean-Luc Marion, who you just mentioned. Thank you so much, Mehdi. Let me just remind everyone, if you listen to the end and you're still hearing us, thank you so much. Really grateful to have you as part of the community at Exploring the Quran and the Bible. Don't hesitate to add your thoughts in the comments. And a reminder that one really good way to stay in touch with the work of Professor Azaiez is his website, Qur'an and Early Islam. Hopefully, if you Google that and maybe his name, Mehdi Azaiez, it'll bring up the website. But just in case, the URL again is Mehdi Azaiez.org. That's MEHDI-AZAIEZ.org. Is there another way that you would recommend for people to stay in touch with you? Academia, some other website? Or
I think
something?
academia would be enough, Gabriel. I think academia would be enough. And the website, I mean, in my website, there is all the bibliography and the books that will be published. And hopefully, inshallah, next year, there will be two books that will be published in De Gruyter and also in the Université Louvain, la Neuve, the presse universitaire de Louvain about Jacqueline Chappy, but everything would be online in my website.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
The pleasure was mine. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll stay in touch. Thank you.
It was my great pleasure.
Well, friends, thanks for being with us for this episode of Exploring the Quran and the Bible. I hope you found it to be an edifying discussion. I really hope that you find generally the content on this channel to be useful. There's a really diverse range of things in regard to Quranic studies and biblical studies with top-notch scholars. And we'll be really grateful for your support. So please don't hesitate to like the videos, starting with this one maybe, to subscribe to the channel and to share the news with your friends about exploring the Quran and the Bible.